is available to be able to do it, and if you'd like to learn, then please see Joel or myself afterwards. This morning we are going to look at our topic this morning, plagued by doubts. It's a play on words, but it's having to deal with these plagues. And it's interesting that most people suffer from some sort of doubt or some sort of fear. Maybe it could be, and I did look up the dictionary once, and there's something like 800 different phobias that we as human beings have. There's a phobia for just about everything. But it could be fear of spiders, frogs. Now this wouldn't happen to you. Cockroaches, snakes. They all will produce some sort of anxiety. And that anxiety often will make us or incapacitate us to function as we normally would. And one professor of psychology in Nevada, Stephen Hayes, says, and he makes a statement, most people do struggle with difficult thoughts and feelings, but we feel we need to show people we are in control. We have things under control. There's a big difference between what's on the inside and what's on the outside. If you've ever doubted yourself, and I wonder, have you ever doubted yourself? We all have, haven't we? Maybe we're still in this auditorium, still having doubts about who we are and what we are. And we understand how this is very crippling. We overanalyze sometimes the missed opportunities. We think about the indecision of, if only I'd made that decision earlier. There's the internal torment, all of which stops us in our tracks from living our lives the way we're supposed to. And one statement I read from an international hypnotherapist, a lady called Marissa Peer, says that there are 3 words that can challenge and erase all doubts, and they are simply this: I am enough. I am enough. I thought about that. She says they're completely powerful words that will change the lives of people. Well, I looked at that and I thought, I wonder how Pharaoh thought after he went through all these, because he was definitely a person who believed this philosophy. I am enough. I am God. I can do what I want. And we find out that he ended up having an overflow of doubts. And he was shown the reality, I am not enough. I need somebody else. And he needed God, but he wasn't looking in that direction. And so often, if you remember in the previous chapter, that Moses still had his doubts about who he was and the job that he was entailed to do. But God worked in that man's life. And the first thing that we find is, well, maybe we will, if it works. In Exodus 7:14, the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to release the people. And so what we find is the issue of the heart. Our text tells us right from the start that Pharaoh has a problem. And he has a heart condition. And that heart condition will prove fatal. And he isn't going to listen to anyone making demands on him to let the people go, because he believes he owns them. He's in charge. Now Pharaoh was so full and stubborn with pride that he believed he was something that he really wasn't. And to make things worse, he wasn't going to listen to anyone tell him anything different. He thought he was this. Now a person who doesn't believe in God doesn't seek help. They don't want it because they believe they don't need it. They believe they are not affected by sin, and the Bible says that is because they are dead in their sins, and their pride stops them from seeing their struggle with sins. Yet a person who comes to trust Jesus Christ actually acknowledges their sins and their problems and all the things that cause it. Now, before I came to Christ, hey, I was good, there was nothing wrong with me. But you know, when I compare that to a holy God, I fall very much short. And it's me being able to see that I need somebody outside myself, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. And of course the Bible has a word to say about this in Jeremiah chapter 17. Does anyone know what it says? It has to deal with the heart. It says this: the human mind is more deceitful than anything else. It is incurably bad. Who can understand it? In verse 10, I, the Lord, probe into people's minds. I examine people's hearts, and I deal with each one according to how he has behaved. I give them what they deserve based on what they have done. That's a modern translation. But it's telling us the heart is deceitful and above all things desperately wicked. Who can know it? Well, there is one person who does know it, and that's God. And Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Now, what I'm talking about is not this heart that pumps blood 24/7. I'm talking about our emotions and our thinking and everything that's attached to it. That's what I'm talking about. Now, Pharaoh was so wrapped up in his own self-importance. After all, he was the son of the gods. He had nothing to worry about because he believed he had all the gods of Egypt on his side, and so they were there to assist him. He could just call them and they would do what he wanted. This was about to be put to the test, and it was going to test his pride, and his pride was going to be his downfall, and the things he trusted in would let him down. He was trusting in these gods, and it's a lesson for us this morning. What are we trusting in? What are we depending upon in life? So often we can be like Pharaoh. I am everything. I don't need anyone else. I've got this person. I can call upon this. I'm in control of this. And it's until a crisis or something happens, then we're exposed and we haven't got what we think. But the first thing, and I've called this, is the instructions are given to humiliate Pharaoh. In Psalm 10 verse 4, the psalmist says, in his pride the wicked man does not seek him. In all his thoughts there is no room for God. And this was where the pride was the root of Pharaoh's problem. In the book of Exodus, he had a sin that hardened his heart over time. But the Bible also tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And by that he gave him what he wanted. He allowed him to do what he wanted. Pharaoh's about to be humbled. He's about to be humiliated by a God he doesn't know anything about and who he refuses to submit to. Along with the tests that are to follow, I believe God's chosen people were to be given a lesson in humiliation as well. Deuteronomy 8:2 says, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to do what? To humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. God knows what's in our hearts. But the fact is, he wants us to know what's in our heart as well. And we don't often want to acknowledge that. But God already knows what's in our hearts. He tested his own people, not to reveal to them the courage in facing powerful enemies, but to remember that he'd already promised to fight their battles for them. God was preparing his people for the blessings that he was about to give them, and for which they were unprepared, as described, and you can look at this in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 7 to 17. And the reason why, God was concerned that once he gave them the blessings, they would be more concerned about the blessings and would forget who he was, that he was the one who provided them for them. We could actually make an application to that today. We're interested in the blessings of God, but so often we forget who has provided those blessings. So God had to teach his people how they could handle all the goodness he was about to give them. So to do that, he had to prepare them to be humble to receive those blessings. So there was more than just a testing. God was preparing them for the future, for the blessings that he was going to pour out upon them, and they were not ready. Now understand one thing here. The children of Israel were a blood-bought people. They had been delivered. They were guided by God. They were the object of his love and power given to them every day. But they lacked one thing. They were not dependent upon him. They were not dependent upon God. You'll see that as we go through. But God had to teach them. And so, human nature, it's so easy for us to forget God. We forget the source of our blessings. We enjoy the blessings, but we're not dependent upon God. When we've got all these things, God is left out of the picture. We only go to God when we get in a crisis that we can't handle anymore. Now the contest begins. In Exodus 7:15, go to Pharaoh in the morning when he goes out to the water. Position yourself to meet him by the edge of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was turned into a snake. And this is where the contest begins. Now, it's important that we understand religion dominated everything in Egypt. Religion dominated everything. There was no separation of state and church, if you like. They were all intertwined together. There was no such thing as the secular versus the sacred, which is what we do today. We draw the lines down the middle. This is secular, this is sacred. And we cross the line every now and again. But we distinguish it. In Egypt, there was no distinguishing. Religion was connected in every part of society, and that's important that we understand. So it's interesting. This is why God brings on a challenge, because Egypt had 80 or more gods. And so the contest is to begin. Now, some people would say, oh, Pastor, look, they were uneducated, unsophisticated people. They're not like us. Really? Egypt had some of the most educated and wise people in the world. They were not dumb. They were not primitive. They were very wise. Yet they fully embraced this system of sophisticated gods. Gods who were useless. Gods who were futile. But nonetheless, they put their trust in these deities. And in the following chapters, we'll show they became absolutely bankrupt because they put their trust in them. These deities could do nothing to save them when the circumstances embraced them. But these were educated people, much like we've got today. Now, I'm not against education, but you know, there's so many academics who have no time for God. Oh, that's a myth. That's in the past. We got past that. These people were exactly the same. But God never forgets the finer details that are required to carry out his plan. And Moses and Aaron were given instructions by God. They were told, first of all, go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Now, Egypt's a big place. How would they know where Pharaoh was and what he was to do? Well, you see, God gave them instructions where they would find him. Some people say, well, you know, it's common knowledge. Everybody would have known that Pharaoh's down the river having a bath. Well, looking through as much research as I can find, people weren't as clean as what we are today. Going down to the river for a bath wasn't exactly the thing that everybody did on a daily basis. Probably when you got, too smelly, it was time for a bath. But it was not, there's no evidence to suggest in ancient times this was something that people did on a daily basis of having a bath in the river. What is more likely is that the Nile River, which was looked upon as being the lifeblood of Egypt, and all the gods that were associated with the Nile were worshipped there by the people. And it's thought that Pharaoh would go down to the river Nile daily to perform some sort of religious ceremony to please the different gods of the Nile. And it seems fitting, this is exactly where Moses and Aaron found Pharaoh that morning. It also tells me something else. How many of you this morning are morning people? How many of you are not quite functioning early in the morning? In between? Cup of coffee? Yes. Boost it up, get it going? Yes, that's me. Well, you know what? Pharaoh was an early morning person. All right, I didn't want to ask the domestics. All I wanted to find out was who's mourning and who's not. Now, you might be mourning because your relatives are still in bed while you're up, but he was an early morning person, and that tells me that Pharaoh is a person who likes to get an early start to the day. In other words, to get the day off to a good start. Only this morning would be very different from any other morning that he's ever experienced before, and it wasn't going to be a good day. The book of Exodus isn't simply about God getting his people free, which he did, but God is saying to Pharaoh, I have the power. I have the authority to set my people free. And you know what? There is nothing you or your gods or goddesses can do to stop me. That's the message that he's conveying to Pharaoh. And we want to look at some of the gods, not all of them. We'd be here forever if I bring them all up. But we need to understand, just with the Nile River particularly, some of these gods associated with the Nile that were worshipped. To the Egyptians, the Nile River was sacred. And there were a number of gods who were given the responsibility to keep it flowing. And one of those first ones, lovely looking person, isn't it? It's called Happy, or Hapi. He's the creator of the Nile. He was given that honor. And he was considered by the ancient Egyptians to be one of the most popular and powerful gods in the land. They believed he was the source of the water flowing in the Nile. So in other words, this god had supreme power over the Nile. Now, the interesting thing about this God, we think we're having problems today with gender fluidity. This God had no problem. One day he could be a male, the next one he could be a female. He could morph into whatever he wanted. But this God had the face of a man, a beard, breasts, and a pregnant stomach. She was thought to reproduce on its own in watery abundance, and when it came time for the annual flooding, it was thought that the Nile, he gave birth to the Nile. So just as Hapi had given birth and nourished all of Egypt with water overflowing from the Nile, he was responsible for it. So you can see the religious connections and connotations. They worship this god or goddess as the creator of the Nile River. But there's more. Lovely looking creature. Kum. He was the guardian of the Nile. He was a ram god, and they considered him to be the guardian of the Nile, and other water sources. In other words, all the tributaries, the rivers, the creeks, everything that came in, this guy was responsible for them. And we have a number of other gods associated with it. Atum, Ra, Osiris, and Isis. These are the major gods. These were the greatest of the Egyptian gods. One of the greatest was called Osiris. And Osiris was known as the god of the underworld, and he ruled over all the gods. And Osiris is said had for his bloodstream the Nile River. And how appropriate it is that the Lord now turns that river into blood. So you see the significance. Often we miss these things, but I'm bringing them so that you can understand what this contest is all about. The Nile River, the longest river in the world, was their lifeblood. And because the people valued it so much, they deified it and worshipped it. It's no surprise that God begins this contest by attacking the source of their pride, the Nile River itself, and everything associated with it, to show and expose all the impotent gods and everything that was in them, that they couldn't do anything to stop what was happening. The Nile River is the beginning of the 10 plagues that will strike Egypt. And it is as if God is saying to Pharaoh, look and learn, Pharaoh, who really is Lord here. Look at your Nile. Look at the god Osiris. Look at Hapi and all the other associated gods of this river. These are the gods that you choose to worship. These are the gods that you bring your offerings to. These are the gods that you sing hymns to and pray to. And for what? They cannot do anything. So what sort of trust have you put into these gods? Here, I am God. I'm a God that you say doesn't exist. A God you don't know. A God that you refuse to recognize. A God who you refuse to submit to. Yet I will turn this river and these gods that you trust in to blood. And you know what? It's going to take me just a moment. It's no big deal for me to do this. And I will do it with a staff. And I'll do it with 2 men, one of whom didn't want to be called a son of Pharaoh. So what do you think about that? Pharaoh, get ready. It's a message that is given very clearly to Pharaoh. You put your trust in these gods, and for what? Can they deliver you? Will they answer you in your time of need? We see the confrontation. Oops. Tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to you to say, release my people, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord has said. By this you'll know that I am the Lord. I am going to strike the water of the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and will be turned into blood. So the confrontation begins. Make no mistake, Pharaoh understood straight away he was in a contest between the gods that he believed in and worshipped every day, and an unknown God who he knows nothing about. So it's a very high-priced contest. Moses and Aaron had originally gone to him with a request to let the Hebrew people go. Pharaoh outrightly refused it. Now he's going to pay big time and big attention to someone who he considered inferior to himself. But the whole point and purposes of all the plagues that are hit Egypt is revealed in verse 17. That you will know I am the Lord. I am the Lord. I'm the Lord over everything. I am the Lord over everyone, and I'll prove it through these plagues that will come upon you. If I take it and put it in a paraphrase, God is saying, let me show you what I mean. And I mean business. This staff, which you've already seen in action, is going to strike the Nile River and is going to turn it into blood. It will not just be part of the Nile that will turn into blood, every part of it, every tributary, every waterway, I will turn it all into blood. If you believe you're superior to me, then you prove it by trying to stop it. You can call upon all the gods that you've trusted in to assist you, I don't mind. But by the time I finish with you, there'll be no doubt in your mind that I am the Lord. Let the contest begin. Now, we already know the Egyptians worshipped over 80 different gods. They put their trust in them to protect and provide for them. As I've stated before, Egypt was a very religious nation. They didn't separate church from state. They believed everything was connected to their gods. The people had been taken in. They had been duped, if you like, by the supposed power that these false idols and gods had, who pretended to be something they were not. Now, we can be hard on the Egyptians, and we can wonder why they would put their trust in these deities. But even in our modern world, religion plays a big role in society, and particularly in the value systems that people trust in. If you Google the number of religions, how many will you find? To be precise, as of yesterday, 4,300 different religions in the world. That's an awful lot of religions, isn't it? I'm talking about 80 here, but worldwide we have 4,300 religions. Some of them I have never ever heard of, but they are listed as religions. In other words, things that people place their trust in. Religions that people follow. Now, this in and of itself presents problems for people. Why do I say that? If I'd gone to Google, which I did, and I got 4,300, which one? How do I know which one's right? Do I have to look up the 4,300 of them? I'll be here for days and days trying to understand and still wouldn't be able to work out. But that presents a problem, because what do these religions teach that causes people to put their trust and faith in them? And they are very, very wide and varied. There are those, many of them, prompting different philosophies that teach that a person must do the right thing, live a good life, do some good works, and you'll get to heaven. You can believe and do whatever you want. All the roads will lead to God eventually. It doesn't matter in the end, as long as you believe in something. That's the main point. How many have heard that one before? Yet people believe in it. It's not a matter of which one's the right one, as long as you get there in the end. It's a journey. It's a journey, all right. And it might not be the point where you get to where you want to go. In among all these man-made gods is the one true God, as revealed in the Bible. And people one day will find out who he is and what he is, while they're calling on the gods of this world that they've trusted in to help them when troubles come calling. We're seeing our world change, and it's changing rapidly. And as I've said before, Christianity it's got a bullseye on it. The philosophies and religions of the world don't want Christianity around, because it is the one true religion, if you like. It points people to God. It points people to sin. It points people to the fact that they need a saviour. And the religions of the world don't need that. They don't want that. So they'll do everything within their power to eliminate it. And it's happening in legislations throughout the world, persecutions that have come across other countries. They're coming to Australia, dear people. They're coming, and they're not far away. But it's going to challenge people who and what they've trusted in. Now there's consequences. In verses 18 through 21, fish in the Nile will die, the Nile will stink, the Egyptians will be unable to drink water from the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over Egypt's waters, over their rivers, over their canals, over their ponds, over all their reservoirs, so that it becomes blood. There'll be blood everywhere in the land of Egypt, even in wooden and stone containers. Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord had commanded. He raised the staff, struck the water that was in the Nile right before the eyes of Pharaoh and his servants, and all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. When the fish that were in the Nile died, the Nile began to stink, so the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood everywhere in the land of Egypt. A very pronounced effect, and it was immediate. Now, Moses and Aaron did exactly what God commanded. They didn't question it, they just did it. And they did it right in front of Pharaoh and his servants. You can imagine Pharaoh and his servants standing there. They'd just finished their worship of their gods. In comes Moses and Aaron, strikes the water, bang, it's all turned to blood right before their eyes. There's no trickery, it's all happened. Now, do you believe that God turned the Nile River into blood everywhere? Do you honestly believe that? Oh, you seem full of doubts this morning. Could God do that? Did God do that? We have a biblical record that says he did. But it's interesting. The scholars have said, no, that's not right. And they've tried to explain it away as being natural phenomenon that occurred. They say that the Blue Nile flowed into the Nile River as it did at that time of year. And as it did, it stirred up a reddish soil. Or there was a number of organisms that glowed red as they swarmed down the Nile. And it made the water appear to be red like blood. And it killed the fish and it caused a smell, which in turn made the frogs and the crocodiles leave the river because they couldn't stand the smell. And then along came the insects to a long hot summer that brought about boils. Then the winter storms came bringing heavy rains and hail, followed by the spring when the locusts would come, and then a dust storm kicks up which would explain the darkness that covers the land. Really? That's how some scholars say, nothing to see here, it was not supernatural, it was just using natural phenomena. Except it doesn't stand up on examination. Because when they go back and look, that wasn't the normal things that happened in Egypt. You see, they want to take the supernatural out of it. And if you believe what the so-called scholars say, and some scientists, then you'll believe anything as possible. But it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Why do I say that? Because in the next chapter, it says this, even the Egyptian declared it was the finger of God working against them. They were well aware of natural phenomena. They were well aware of climate factors. And they said, no, this is the finger of God at work against us. So even the Egyptians acknowledged this was the work of God. Now the Egyptian people relied on the Nile for food and water, and it turned to blood, began to stink, and all the fish and vegetation began to die. So what were they going to do? They were going to call upon their gods, two of which we have up on the screen. Well, that's the consequences. There's the two gods. The goddess Hatmathi, she was her name means she who is in front of the fishes. Then we have goddess Hathor in charge of the other fish in the Nile. So what we have is two goddesses who were in charge of the fishes. So the Egyptian people were worshipping their gods, and they're saying to their gods, what's happening? We rely on you to protect and provide these fish for us. she couldn't stop the fish from dying. The people's food supply was gone. So these goddesses, gone. But wait, there's more. Oops. Neith, the protector of the large fish, and she's also the ancient goddess of war and weaving. She was also the goddess of fertility as well. So she wore many hats. So she's a very busy lady. She had the special task of taking care of the fish, and all of them died. There was another god, Hathor, in charge of the rest of the fish, and they all died. So what is God actually doing here? He's challenging the people's belief system. You trust in these gods and goddesses. Call upon them. Ask them to change and stop what is happening. I want to show you they're powerless. Call upon them. Go on, call upon them. Where are they? And of course, if I was an Egyptian person now, I'd be imploring my God and goddesses to, come on, fix it up. You see, the people gave thanks to their gods through worship. They praised the river for its supply of water. And they also sacrificed a boy and a girl every year in gratitude for what they got from the river. That was all brought to a complete standstill. Now they couldn't grow crops. Everything was full of blood and stunk. This had an effect that the economy was now devastated. And I have no doubt that God has a sense of humour here. The Egyptians believed that the Nile River came from the bloodstream of their god Osiris. And every year when it flooded, it represented the rebirth of Osiris, the god of earth and vegetation. And God is saying, you believe that the Nile is Osiris's bloodstream, that he's responsible for giving you all these blessings. Well, you want blood? You've got it. Open your eyes and see the truth here. So the gods of the Nile have been challenged and put on notice, and they've been found wanting. We go then to what I call the indifferent hypocrite. I couldn't help but think at this moment, what were God's people thinking about all of this that was happening? Particularly when the Nile River was full of stinking dead fish. What were they thinking about at this time? And there's no getting away from it. You couldn't get away from the smell of death and decay in the river. Remembering everybody's touched by the Nile River. What were they thinking? Do you think it had any relevance for them? I think it did. And God's got a wonderful sense of humour, because the people had said to Moses, when Moses first went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go, and of course Pharaoh was compliant, wasn't he? Very understanding person. No. What did he do to the people? He made them work harder. And what did the people say about Moses' intervention on their behalf? To the effect that they had said to Moses, you have made us a stench in Pharaoh's nostrils. And behold, what a stink there was in the land of Egypt at this time. You see God's sense of humour? The people thought because Moses had gone and said, let my people go, that the people were off, they smelt. Well, here's the sense of humour. You've really got something to complain about now, because everything stinks. The people didn't understand what God was doing. They thought they knew better than God at that time, and that's something that you and I do quite as well. We think we know better than God. We try to tell God what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, don't we? You see, a few weeks before this event, the people were asking God, what are you doing? We've been in captivity or slavery for how many years? 400 years, and what have you been doing about it, God? Having a sleep? Having a snooze? Have you just woken up? Why did you bring Moses and Aaron into this? They made everything worse than it was before. Now we are simply a stench in the nostrils of Pharaoh. And God is basically saying to here, hey people, just take a breath for a moment. Just settle down. Just settle down. I'm in control of everything. It's all going the way that I want. And yes, you will be a stench, and it will go throughout all of Egypt. Don't worry about a thing. I've got this. Trust me. It's going to work out. He was teaching his people their need to trust in God for everything as well. And the reason being, they had been in Egypt for too long. They too had assimilated their gods into their way of thinking. And God was teaching Pharaoh and the Egyptian people the futility of putting their trust in false man-made gods. Or in Pharaoh's case, to wake up to himself. He never was a god. He deceived himself into thinking he was something he wasn't. God would demonstrate his power and authority over everything they believed in and expose them as being nothing, with the idea that people would respond and submit to him when they realised he was a true God. So in so many ways, we're like Pharaoh. We are hypocrites when it comes to saying and doing things. And we can be callous and indifferent, as Pharaoh was with his stubbornness and rebellion against God, particularly when we know God is right and we're wrong. Have you ever experienced what it is to know you've said something and you've been proven wrong? And when you've been proven wrong, do you say, I'm sorry, you were right and I was wrong? Or do you say, no, not going to wear that. I can't acknowledge that I was wrong. It's impossible for me to be wrong. Well, God likes to show us very clearly you are wrong. And often in our rebellion, God does show us we're wrong. How then do we respond to God when we know we're wrong? Do we continue our rebellion? Do we continue to want our own thing? You better believe it. We do. We do. Then we have what I call, in verse 22, but the magicians of Egypt did the same thing by their secret arts. And so Pharaoh's heart remained hard, and he refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. These are what I call the copycats. The copycats. Because, you think if you'd just seen the whole of the Nile River turn to blood, you would be impressed. It would be enough to get you to pay attention and say, whoa, what's going on here? Who's done this? But not Pharaoh. Pharaoh summoned his sorcerers to do the same thing as Aaron and Moses. And I thought, well, if all of the Nile River has turned to blood, where are they going to get their water supply from? Where are they going to get it? I have no idea. It's been suggested that maybe the Hebrew people had some water in jars that they'd had, and that had been confiscated by Pharaoh, and this was what they use now to use it. I don't know. But I do know this. They're able to take these jars or containers and through their magic arts turn it to blood. Now, they were not able to turn the whole river into blood, but they're able to duplicate it in some water. And the fact is that if they had the power, supposedly, they should have been able to reverse that river of blood. That's what they should have been able to do. But you know what? They didn't. They were not able to return it to its pristine condition. That was beyond their capabilities. But it seems enough that when Pharaoh sees these containers full of water just turn to blood, okay, fellas, that's good. He turns his back and walks away. He was convinced, you can't do anything better. My blokes have done exactly the same. So he was not convinced as yet that this was something that he should pay attention to. How were the magicians able to do something? I don't know. They may be sleight of hand to be able to do something, but he was resistant to the truth. And I must say this, as people living in a modern world today, do we actually believe in a person called Satan? Do we believe in a real devil? Or is he just a figment of our imagination? Something from the, dim dark past that's been dragged up every now and again to explain why there's all evil in the world. Is that all it is?
No, the devil's real.
What's he like?
He's invincible.
Has he got his pitchfork? Is he prodding you right now? You see, we have all these things of, he's got his red suit on with his horns and his big tail and glowing eyes and everything else. That's our vision and idea of what Satan looks like. But it's not the Bible's only description of him. He's an angel of light. And as an angel of light, that means deception. You're an imitator. You're a copycat. And those who are empowered by him can do similar sorts of things, but they haven't got the complete power. But they are copycats and imitators. And it's as though these magicians will say, hey, no big deal, I can do that too. They did it in a little jar of water, but they were unable to do it to the whole river. To a normal thinking person, okay, you can do that. You can duplicate what was just done, but you haven't solved this problem. In fact, you've contributed more blood to the problem. You haven't solved it. You haven't fixed this, which is what we want you to do. The reality is, this fresh jar of water in the container was now gone. They'd turned it to blood. What were they going to do now to get some fresh drinking water? They just turned this only water they had because the Nile River was contaminated and undrinkable. So there's no other water supply now. All these guys had done was just turn some more water into blood. They were not able to reverse it. They didn't have the power to do it. Then they've got, in verse 23, Pharaoh turned and went into his house. He did not pay any attention to this. This is callousness. To be callous, what does it mean? Yeah. It means to be insensitive. It means to be indifferent. It means to be unsympathetic to other people's circumstances and situations. Here he is, a god, a son of Ra, the sun god. And yet he's incapable of turning the Nile back into a pristine state for his people. He didn't have the power to solve the problem. So what did he do about it? Spun on his heel, went into his house. Not my problem. So he's indifferent to the suffering of his people. He's unmoved, unconvinced by what has just happened. In other words, he didn't care what effect this had on the nation and its people. He simply walked off into his house, removed himself from the problem. He didn't want to know about it. He didn't have an answer, but he didn't want to know about it. Then we have, in the last one, all the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink because they could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 full days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. We see the casualties, and you'll see it transpired here. You've got all the people around the Nile, either side there, looking for water. We're told the Nile River remained in this condition for 7 full days. How long are you able to go without a drink of water? I don't know, I haven't put it to the test. But you'd get awful thirsty if you had to wait 7 days, wouldn't you?
Yes.
It'd be driving you nuts. And so you can understand why the people around either side digging, maybe hoping to dig down deep past the water source and find some fresh water. But not only did they suffer from lack of water, but they had no food. Because what happened to all the fish? They died. The river stunk, remember? And so there's no fish to provide them with nourishment. And history records for us that many Egyptians died during this first plague. The people were digging wells in the hope of finding fresh water. Now, if I'm an Egyptian and I put my trust in all these gods and I've called out to them and they're not doing their job and they failed me, what am I going to feel? Aren't you going to feel anger? Aren't you going to feel frustration? Aren't you going to start to ask yourself, why did I trust in them to start with? What good have they done me? I worship them, and all these gods can do is let us down when we need it. We've cried out to our gods, and they've let us down. They've let us down. And this is what happens when we put our trust in other things apart from God. Now, how do you know that you're worshipping an idol? How do you know if you're worshipping an idol? Well, it does take over your life. But do modern people worship idols? But we don't call them gods though, do we? Come on, let's be fair, we don't call them gods. Do we? But we do worship the blessings that we're given, and we treat them like gods. We give them our time, we invest in them with our money and effort and attention, and they motivate us and move us to want them. And what happens when they let us down? How do we respond? Frustration. We look for a new God. Something will provide us with happiness. Something that will give us our oomph for the day. Give us purpose. Give us meaning. Now, how has that worked out in everyday life? For example, to worship something. What sort of house? What's your dream house? What's it like? Where is it going to be? What's it consist of? Many people have their ideas, design it from top to bottom, put all their money and effort and look at it, and it's wonderful. And then a few years later, the dream house is not so much the dream house anymore. Why? Because as things get older, they fail. They need repair. They need maintenance. It's not as good as what it looked when we first bought it. So we've got to look for another dream house. It could be the car you always wanted to drive. Now, I'm still waiting for that one. I want to drive a Ferrari, always have since a young boy. Will I ever see one? I've seen them. No. Yes, but I haven't got them. That's why I haven't got it, Karen. But even if I did get one, would it remain my dream car? When someone scratched it, when something happens to it? No, I would throw it away, and what would I do? I would get another one. But let's take it a bit more personal. What we've just had the start of yesterday, the Rugby League Premiership and the AFL Premierships have begun. Are you dreaming that your team is going to win the flag?
We hope so.
Well, there you go. But what I'm asking though, yeah, you don't want that one. But what I'm saying is there are many people that will live the whole season just hanging on their team winning. We will see as the season develops. I know we've got some diehards here who follow that. But they dream about their team winning. Or in relationships, are you looking for the perfect man and the perfect woman? What does your dream man look like? What does your dream woman look like? Don't laugh. We all have our ideas and our dreams and aspirations. We get married and we find out, hey, the reality is they're not my dream anymore. What happens? We go out and get a new one. What about the kids you wanted and all the dreams that you wanted for them? Has that happened for you? You know, we look at any number of things that we take up, we invest in, we put our money into, and we worship as gods. And when they fail us, what happens? These are the things that we put our trust in. These are the things that we follow. Are we any different? God is there, but hey, I'll call you when I need you. I'm trusting in my dream. I'm following my dream. I'm pursuing my dream. I'm investing in my dream. I'm making my dream happen. Stay out of it. When I need you, I'll ask for you. You see, the Nile was a good thing. And it was a good thing. All these things are good. But the people turned the Nile into a god that was to be worshipped. If you turn any good thing in your life into a god, that god will let you down. Your best friend, your spouse, in this case, the water in the Nile, let them down. The water gods failed them. They failed to deliver. This was the very first plague, and it failed to impact Pharaoh. He saw it, yet he remained stubborn and resistant. He wasn't about to give up on his gods. He wasn't about to give up on his beliefs just yet. And I wonder this morning, as you sit here, or as you listen, how about you? Are you plagued with doubts this morning? Doubts about yourself? Doubts about your purpose in life? Doubts about who God is and whether he can do all the things he says he can? What are you trusting in this life to get you through? God or yourself and the gods that you've surrounded yourself with. In other words, gods that we've made in our own image, gods that we can manipulate to do what we want without any consequences, gods that will continue to make life sweeter and happier for you. Well, beware. There will be a day of reckoning for you and the gods that you're trusting in. What will it take to get your attention and prepare you for what is to follow? Pharaoh just went home, shut his mind off, shut everything else to the problems that were happening, and went into his own home. Ignored it. And you might be here this morning And you might be ignoring this message completely, saying, I've got no time for God. I'm too busy chasing my dreams and doing what I want. Well, the message is very clear. You'll enter a contest with God, and guess what? You'll lose. But you will know who this God of the Bible is. Are you prepared to meet him when the time comes? As the team comes.